Naya, mom, boob nerd, board-certified lactation consultant, and lover of lipstick and curse words. I'm that weird Indian girl you knew in high school, all grown up.
And I'm Alexis, mom, birth nerd, and therapist plus doula, encouraging parents to hold joy plus what the fuck is this mess simultaneously. Some people think I'm too much, but those aren't my people.
And we are the Top Knot Squad.
TKS is a tiny little podcast about motherhood in real life, the good, the bad, the ugly AF.
Hosted by two women that are passionate about our beliefs and unafraid to speak our minds.
Friends that wanted to create space for all that ish we are too scared to talk about.
Are you ready to laugh, be vulnerable, and keep it real with us?
Top knots are not required.
If the Top Knot Squad content makes you laugh, nod in agreement, or makes you feel less alone, we'd love your support in the cost of producing this podcast. Visit patreon.com/topknotsquad to learn more about our budget-friendly sponsorship tiers and how you can help ensure that TKS has a future. Every little bit helps.
Content warning. On this episode of TKS, we will be discussing a very heavy topic, birth trauma. This topic can be triggering for some. We know birth and trauma are very personal experiences, but we hope our guests can help us understand more about this topic. Please listen with an open heart, but also take the space you may need. When we think of a traumatic birth, the worst case scenarios often come to mind. A stillborn child or maternal demise. However, it encompasses so much more because trauma is subjective. Underlying themes of birth trauma include a lack of caring, from a lack of communication, and birthing parents feeling stripped of their dignity. A birth is said to be traumatic when the individual, parent, or other witness believes the birthing person's or the baby's life was in danger, or that a serious threat to the birthing person or the baby's physical or emotional integrity existed. According to the Prevention and Treatment of Traumatic Childbirth, 25 to 34% of women report their birth as traumatic. We're excited to have our guest, Ann Tropea, join us for this conversation today. A little more about her. Ann is a certified birth doula and has supported births in Jerusalem, Vietnam, and the DC metro area. She is also a practicing attorney and a writer and has experience working through birth trauma with clients in her role as a doula and as an attorney representing clients in medical malpractice actions. Ann holds a law degree from Loyola University's Chicago School of Law and graduated magna cum laude in mass media communication studies from New York University. Ann currently lives in Baltimore with her husband, Joe, two children, Julian and Lucy, and dog, Geof. We're so glad you're here.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk to you both about this really important topic.
Let's dive in. Ann, do you want to tell us a little bit about how, you came to this work and a little bit more about what you do around birth trauma?
Sure. So I came to the doula space kind of from a work, I was a stay-at-home mom for a long time. I'd gone to law school, have an advanced degree, was a practicing attorney in New Orleans. Decided I was ready to be a mom and have a family, and quickly realized that working 80 hours a week at a law firm was not sustainable as a parent. When my oldest was born, I gave up my law career for a long time to kind of focus on, babies and home. My daughter, my son was conceived first try, beginner's luck, I guess. With my daughter, it took me over a year and some pretty intense fertility meds. So I have experience, kind of with the, having to give yourself injections every day and kind of dealing with the not getting pregnant month after month after month, and the emotional toll that takes. But I had amazing births with both of them. I was able to, my oldest, I birthed at a birth center in Chicago, and he was a water birth. My daughter, I birthed in Northern California in Davis, also a water birth, both with midwives, both completely under my control without any kind of intervention or trauma at all. And I had these very transformational birth experiences that made me feel the strength of not just myself, but like what we are capable of as birthing people. And I felt very strongly that, other people should have the opportunity to have that experience. And I realized just talking to friends, having casual conversations with people who had children, in various mom groups, that this was not the norm. A lot of people have had births, maybe that weren't traumatic, but certainly weren't things that people were excited to talk about, or things, births that they were not happy with, things that they would have liked to have been different, but didn't realize they had the options or the choices to make those births different from how they turned out. Right. When my ex is a US diplomat, and we were posted in Jerusalem, and, there were a lot of expat Americans, either with the embassy or the consulate, but no doula support. I mean, you're in a foreign country, you don't speak the language, you're not immersed in the culture. Jerusalem was a special challenge because the communities there are very insular. You have very extended families where people kind of have, moms and aunts and cousins, and people birth at home, and that's normal. But as Americans who are kind of coming in, and most of whom are not Jewish and not definitely involved in those very local birth scenes and cultures and family structures, there is no support. And that's true in a lot of posts abroad for Americans who are kind of living as expats permanently. Maybe they're diplomats, maybe they're military families, maybe they are working for NGOs or nonprofits, maybe they're working for the UN or USAID, or any number of these kind of international groups where Americans serve overseas, serve abroad in their capacity as Americans, but don't really have the support and the communities and the family structures to be there for them during these life events, like being pregnant, having a baby, giving birth. What do you do if you need an abortion or you want an abortion? What do you do if there is birth trauma, or there are challenges surrounding fertility or consent? Any of these things kind of come up when you're not in your normal, your regular space within the United States. So I quickly saw a need for that. I was passionate about it. I trained to be a doula. My very first birth client was in Jerusalem, American citizens. We ended up going to an Arabic hospital on the Palestinian side of Jerusalem, where the hospital was run by Italian nuns who only spoke French and Arabic.
Oh, wow.
Thankfully, I had French, not Arabic, not so much, but enough to get by. And my birth client ended up having this amazing water birth, totally unmedicated. I was, as a doula, first-time doula, I was given a surprising amount of leeway, and just the doctor came in and said, look, I'm going to teach you how to use this machine so you can monitor her heart rate. That would never happen in the US, right?
No, never, ever.
And I would never say yes in the US if someone did offer that. But when you're abroad and you're in a different culture and your goal is to just kind of support your birth client, you say, okay, you say it in Arabic or French. But you definitely, kind of step into roles that maybe you wouldn't in other spaces. And that was true for me in Vietnam as well. But I guess ultimately, long story short, I saw a need, I had a passion, I stepped into that role because, basically all the stars aligned. And yeah, I mean, that was kind of my journey to becoming a birth doula, from being an attorney and a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah, that's wild. We had
incredible.
I don't know if you know Sarah Bonds. She's local to Austin, but you guys both have crazy, awesome stories.
Yes.
Yeah, you're actually making me think. I mean, like all birth is political, which is, I think, is a part of the reason why trauma exists in birthing spaces, right? So maybe that's a good kind of segue into identifying more about like this definition of birth trauma and what that is and what that means. I don't know if you have more to add to that.
I mean, I think birth trauma is like that term can be super fluid and it can encompass a lot of things. I don't think, us as a group, as, three women who work in this space, we don't need to define it. I think if you feel that your birth was traumatic, it's kind of self-defining, and that can mean a lot of things. Maybe it meant that you were afraid that your baby was going to die, or that you were in danger, or maybe you're as a partner to a birthing person, you feel like the birthing person was in danger, or the baby being birthed was in danger. But I also think, having spoken with many people who feel traumatized by birth, that even if none of those things are true, things that happen in the birth room with a doctor or a midwife or a nurse, like individualized things, can add up to what someone experiences as a traumatic birth. And maybe that means, there was an unconsented to procedure. Maybe that means, you don't feel like your voice was heard, even though the birth turned out fine and everyone was healthy and well, and, baby was born healthy, and, nothing happened to the birthing parent, nothing bad happened per se, but, the overall feeling was not great. And that can add up to trauma too. So I think there are a lot of definitions for birth trauma. And, as a doula and as an attorney, I kind of take all of these thoughts and feelings about birth, maybe in a broader context, because for me, as someone supporting people in one way or the other, how you feel is ultimately more important than what actually happens, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Yes, it does.
Yes. Put it on a t-shirt. No, I love that you're also speaking to, like, we don't need to birth trauma is, because it's in the eye of the beholder. Like, each birthing person gets to determine what their experience was. I love that, how you named that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do think that giving people the space to say, like, I felt traumatized by what happened, whether or not it fits into a neat little trauma box,
right,
is important to recognize and kind of open space for.
So, can we speak a little bit about the harm that's happening specifically to marginalized groups in birthing spaces? As a lactation consultant, I work with families after birth. I'm not there for the birth. I'm there to kind of help them with the after effects of birth. But specific to marginalized groups, is there something that you both could add to this conversation of harm that's happening to them?
I think I might have added this question in, actually, Naya.
Okay. Jump in.
I was also just thinking about just what we know in regards to birth outcomes, and how Black mothers and Black babies are disproportionately impacted. Black women are dying 3 to 4 times more than their white counterparts. Like, we don't all. I don't know how many of our listeners know the statistics. If you're in the birth world, you know about the poor outcomes that exist in our country. But I don't think that the piece that's missing for me is that, we're talking about this, but we're not always talking about it through a lens of trauma, and through a lens of, because of the color of your skin, or because of your gender identity, because of poverty, because of mental illness or substance use, like all these different labels that are put on people. And then because of unconscious bias or conscious bias, your care looks different. The way you're treated looks different. And then just the sense of being already you're entering birth with chronic stress, which is impacting the physiological process of birth all on its own. And then you're met with more cuts. You're met with more poor treatment. And how, that's birth trauma. We're not always identifying those experiences. It's more of the other pieces we were talking about. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of add that to the conversation.
No, that's a really good point. And I think you and I touched on this a little bit when I came on Trauma Talk and talked a little bit about it. It's almost like, what did you say? Big T and little t trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of things that maybe people who are more privileged would call a little t, somebody else that's in a more marginalized community or who is more prone to having a provider that has bias would definitely call that a big T. So yeah, it definitely goes back to birth and trauma being so subjective.
Yeah. And I recently was listening to Fanny Priest, who's a yoga therapist here locally. And then I actually read the same thing in this book. I'm reading polyvagal exercises. I'm a polyvagal nerd when it comes to trauma. But anyways, I think it was Deb Dana. She said the same thing, but sorry, I have a point. She referred to big T and little t in a sense of too much too soon. So like we have those shock traumas, those big events that we think of when we think of trauma, like life-threatening, too much too soon. It's a shock to your system versus too little for too long.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I think that's a big part of what leads into birth trauma. And even if we have two birthing parents and the outcome is exactly the same, the birth parent who have had their concerns heard and acknowledged and addressed is going to have a better birth experience than the birthing parent who, didn't have any of their concerns addressed or heard or acknowledged, right?
Mm-hmm.
So part of it is just being able to say what you're feeling and, express your desires and your choices. And I do think that especially for people of color, where the majority of doctors are white, this is just a lot less likely to happen. And it's very unfortunate. And I do think that is a big factor when we're looking at incidences of birth trauma in different communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're speaking to feeling seen and heard, which essentially provides safety. So from a polyvagal perspective, our very first line of defense as human beings when we don't feel safe is connection. It's to socially engage, to feel seen, to feel heard, to have someone attuned to our needs. And so when that's not met, we move into, fight, flight, or freeze responses. And so that's exactly what you're speaking to, is that's something doulas are providing, is that doulas are sometimes referred to as a first line of defense. And it's exactly that. They're attuned to their clients. They're able to make those connections. And if we don't have that, we're not going to have safety in our birth space. And, we're not going to feel good about how that experience went.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's definitely true.
Well, on that note, what do you think birthing people can do to ensure having an informed birth?
Yeah, I think that, of course, as a birth doula, I'm biased. I think having a doula, hiring a doula, working with a doula, either on a volunteer basis or a doula for hire basis, is going to be beneficial because then you do have someone in your corner, so to speak, in the birthing room, someone who has likely supported births in the hospital that you're at or the birth center, and who can kind of deconstruct what's going on in a real time way. Hospital rooms are intimidating. There's a lot going on. There are monitors and things are being recorded. Nurses are in and out. It's even if you've been in a hospital a couple of times, that doesn't really prepare you for the intensity of the labor and delivery section of a hospital if you've never been there. And a lot of, if you're a first-time parent, chances are you haven't been there. And if you have, you were probably busy birthing your baby and not paying attention to the details of what's going on around you. Mm-hmm. When I talk to potential birth clients as a doula, I always emphasize kind of the benefit of having someone there who knows what's going on and who can just explain even basic stuff about, this is what this monitor is doing. Here's what's going on over here. Here's why the nurse is saying X, Y, and Z, or kind of being an advocate for your client, right? And stepping in and saying, hey, birthing person, do you understand what the nurse just said to you? Do you want it to be explained in a different way? Do you want different options? Do you want to, talk about it? Just being able to open up that dialogue is huge, because if you're in labor and you're birthing your baby, trust me, I've been there. You're not in your right mind. You're not functioning on a fully rational basis. Your hormones are happening, all kinds of physical stuff is happening. You're concentrating, you're trying to be in your birth space. Being able to have someone there to kind of be your backup, be your wingman, kind of call out the things where you might want to ask additional questions, and just giving your birthing person an opportunity to realize that they can ask, they can take a pause, they can kind of reevaluate what's going on with their own birth. Mm-hmm. And if you're not an experienced doula, if you don't have someone there who knows that those things are possible and that they can advocate for you or help you advocate for yourself, which I'm a bigger fan of, it's just not going to happen. Mm-hmm. Nurses are, have their schedules and their procedures. Hospitals have protocols. They're not going to willingly step out of their norm for a specific person. You have to push for that if you want it. And it's not always easy to push for that.
You're talking about informed consent, which is not a standard of practice in the medical model of care. They think that it is because you sign a form, but a form is not informed consent. It's, informed consent is a discussion that you're describing, right? The discussion is what you're providing to your clients. You're giving space for that.
I mean, informed consent is a huge issue. And what that means on a real level for birthing people, and what doctors and hospitals and lawyers think that means, right? I come at this from multiple perspectives. And something that I always emphasize with my own birth clients is that, there's a difference between a doctor saying, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. Is that okay? And, option B, is it okay if I do X, Y, and Z? Mm-hmm. It's very subtle. If I'm a lawyer and I'm arguing, whether or not there was informed consent in this particular case, I think there's a good argument for option A that there was. Mm-hmm. But on a real level with real people who are often intimidated by authority figures, or who feel like they can trust the doctor that is treating them because they're a doctor and they know better, right? And they're trained and all of the stuff that's kind of wrapped up in that title and that education. I think there's a huge difference. I think option A is not informed consent. I think that borders on coercion. And that's
Yes.
just my personal,
No, I'm with you.
Feeling about that. Option B opens up a conversation. Option A doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're talking about consenting to a procedure, if you tell someone you're going to do something and then kind of putting the onus on them to say, to object, that's a lot harder to do. It's a lot easier to say yes or no to a question like, is it okay if I do this?
Mm-hmm.
You kind of have built into that question is the opportunity to say, no, I don't agree to that, or I don't know if I agree to that. Can you tell me more about it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Option A assumes that you're going to say yes because you have a doctor who seems to have, has had like 1,000 years of, education, and who is, putting on this persona of, kind of, I know best. I'm going to take care of you, little lady, or whatever it is. It's very patronizing and I don't like it. And I think when doctors do that, if I'm in the room, I will always reframe the question for my client and say, the doctor said they're going to do X, Y, and Z. Do you have any questions about that? You can say no to that, by the way.
Yeah. I think a lot of it also goes back to power. And when you ask the question, the B, I guess way B, I'm going to mess it up if I try to say it, but if you ask the question in such a way so that the birthing person can say no, they have the power to say no. And I think so much of it is that shift in power dynamic. And I think in my experience, it seems like it's really hard for some healthcare providers to almost like give up some of that power in order for the birthing person to make the best possible decision for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also of course, we're not here like trying to bash healthcare providers. There are wonderful and lovely healthcare providers, but they still exist within a system that it was built with harmful practices. So even the best providers are navigating a system that has policies and procedures and practices that limit what the provider can do, or at least what they feel like they can do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know we're really low on time and I want to ask some of our listener questions, but I was also curious about some of the, just from your attorney perspective, like how can, for our listeners or anyone that's experienced birth trauma, like I feel like another piece of this is that on the other end, this has happened. And like, what do I do with it? How do I process this? Right. And a lot of times the option of like making a report is not, or even a lawsuit, like those aren't necessarily options that are even considered or given. And I'm just curious, because you have that lens, what advice or what you would want to share around that.
Yeah. So it is kind of a difficult space to be in, right? If anyone listening has experienced birth trauma, however you choose to define that, I would encourage you to seek out an attorney in your local area who has experience in medical malpractice litigation. I will be totally honest and say a medical malpractice suit is complicated and difficult. Mm-hmm. It is costly. It's not always going to get, it's one solution. If you can call it a solution, it's one avenue of, proceeding to kind of, if you want to hold people accountable, unfortunately, the way that we do that in our society is to sue them. The result of a civil lawsuit, and we're, a medical malpractice suit is, in a civil court, This is not a criminal proceeding. The only result that you can get out of a successful civil lawsuit is money. You're not going to get an apology, right? You're not going to get a change in hospital policy. You will get money for damages that a court determines is reasonable for the harm that you've suffered. But getting from A to Z in a medical malpractice lawsuit can be a rocky road. And if you have experienced birth trauma, it's totally legit. Like, the last thing that you want to do is to have to relive that trauma for the next year and a half while your lawsuit works its way through the court system. And that's just the reality of those types of lawsuits. You need medical experts. You need, expert depositions. You need very specific testimony about standards of practice in your area for doctors, for OBGYNs. Hospitals tend to have really robust legal representation. So you have to take that into consideration, that if you're planning to file suit against a doctor who works for a big hospital, they have an endless source of money to fight that claim. And that can, in a lot of cases, maybe not in a lot of cases, but in some cases that can contribute to the trauma that you've already experienced, right?
Absolutely.
Not being believed, have to argue your, what happened to you, having to prove that, just the fact of having to prove that the pain, the emotional pain and suffering that you've experienced is worthy of financial compensation. I mean, just the idea of that is distasteful, I think, for a lot of people in a lot of ways. I don't think that the legal system is set up to really compensate or support people who have experienced trauma in this way. However, there are situations, and, I've represented clients who have experienced birth trauma where there were, unconsented to procedures, episiotomy, like forceps delivery, where physical trauma has resulted in addition to, emotional trauma and, kind of just feeling like, the birth system was working against them and not for them. So in those cases, you really have to just weigh, like, what are you able to do emotionally? What do you want out of the lawsuit, right? If what you want is for the trauma to go away, maybe a medical malpractice lawsuit doesn't make sense for you. Maybe that's going to make it worse. But, I do think that the people who are able to stand up and kind of testify and say, this hospital did this thing and I didn't say yes, and they did it anyway, that can help the people, the birthing people, and just, anyone else coming into the hospital, that can help people down the line. If you hold these organizations and these like monoliths of healthcare accountable. But it is tricky. I mean, maybe you don't want to educate an entire population. Maybe you don't want to help, the generations after you. Not everyone is able to do that. And I get that. And I don't think it's the right answer for everyone, but it is an option, and there are lawyers who specialize in this and who can help. So it's really just, it matters, how you feel about what you're able to do and what you feel like, what result you want in the end, and to be realistic about that.
I was looking at our listener questions because we're not going to have time to ask you all of them. Some of these I could answer. A lot of them are related to mental health care, actually. I really liked this one. I have a question about grief that I'm trying to formulate but can't quite express. How to know if it's grief or a trauma response? but it's hard to ask because I get in this weird space where I'm like, what's the difference and why does it matter? Clearly this person's question was their stream of consciousness, which I love. But yeah, maybe we can speak for a second about that. Does anything come to mind for you around the differences between grief and trauma?
I mean, I think one is a natural response to the other. You know, I think they're very intertwined. I don't think we need to create, you know, bright lines between those two things. You know, I have not experienced birth trauma, but I have experienced trauma in a hospital setting where I definitely was not heard. And stuff happened that I, you know, wasn't even aware of or wasn't given a chance to agree to or consent to. So I think you know, that was traumatic. And I think I still am processing grief over those experiences. So yeah, no, I don't think for whoever wrote that question in, you know, I think it's more valuable. It's time better spent to kind of unpack your feelings than to figure out which arbitrary box they fit in.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, I guess when I read it, I thought a little bit about, you know, like grief is oftentimes tied to a loss, which when we're talking about birth trauma, there's lots of losses within that, right? Of like the loss of your wanted birth experience, the loss of having support. I mean, even thinking about COVID right now, like the extra losses that exist in that and how that's traumatic, but it's also something was taken that you should have had, right? Whereas like the trauma response that we're dealing with is like that issue of safety. Like there's safety missing from the space. Connection is missing from the space. But yeah, I also agree. Here's where they may be different, but ultimately, yeah, like why are we trying to fit it in a box?
Right.
Did you have one you really wanted to ask, Naya?
Actually, yeah. Can you speak to secondary trauma of birth workers and burnout, Ann?
Sure. I think this is I think this is definitely a legit thing to think about and to consider as a birth worker who has experienced secondary birth trauma. And just to define that quickly, witnessing trauma happening to someone other than myself, right? Like in a birthing space, and not being able to do anything about it. It's hard. It's something that I think about a lot. These are, you know, the times that I've witnessed, for example, unconsented to episiotomies, you know, just witnessing that happening and seeing the fallout with my birth clients and working through that with them. But also kind of feeling responsible because I didn't or I couldn't do anything in the moment. The reality is that can often happen so quickly. And unless you're anticipating it and like willing to kind of put your hand in front of a scalpel, you can't stop it. As much as I, you know, kind of replayed some of these experiences in my head and said, you know, how could I have done this differently? How could I have prevented this? And also realizing, you know, as a doula, your job isn't necessarily to prevent anything or to stop anything, but to be an advocate for your client and not make the choices for them. So it is difficult and hard to just take that on as a responsibility that maybe doesn't really have a great solution. You know, it's likely I couldn't have done anything to stop what happened. But yeah, I mean, there is secondary trauma. I can attest to that. It's important to be able to talk to other birth workers and professionals who have witnessed similar or experienced similar and just know that, you know, I know intellectually, I know that it wasn't my fault, but emotionally, it's very hard to accept that and say, kind of like disown that and say, oh yeah, well, it wasn't my fault, so I don't have to feel anything about it. But the truth is that you do feel stuff about lots of things that maybe you don't officially have responsibility for, but you feel like maybe you should have.
Right.
Which is a similar process that our clients go through. I mean, they're asking themselves the same question. Like when you experience trauma, that's a common, symptom of trauma is reliving the event, placing blame on yourself and what you could have done differently. So when we're bearing witness to that, it makes sense that we might actually bear that whole process. I know we're way over time, but you also just made me think again about when I said, we're not here to like bash medical professionals, but I do always like to name that like the folks that are navigating medical systems are walking around doing their work extremely traumatized. And that's a part of what's making their decisions, right? Because when you have that chronic stress, it's hard to navigate high stress environments and not have stress response in action, right? So I also have like immense empathy for, again, everything that we've talked about today it's a system issue.
I mean, I do, just kind of as a closing note to speak to your point, Alexis, like I do think like systemically the way that we deal with birth in the US is wrong, just flat out. It's medicalized, it's, pathologized in a way that kind of, asks for the result of trauma, right? It assumes that something is wrong. And if you're looking for a problem, you're going to fucking find it. Right?
Yeah.
Amen. Yeah.
That's always the lens with which I view birth and kind of address and connect with my birth clients. If we adjust our assumptions, if we question the assumptions of the medical field, and look, like doctors are trained to deal with emergencies and like life-threatening, life-altering diseases and conditions and injuries. They're not set up to deal with birth, which is none of those things. And I don't blame doctors. I blame their education. I blame the culture of, not listening to women and women's experiences and birthing people's experiences and trivializing and reducing those things to something that can be solved with an IV drip. I think the way that we change birth culture in the US is to change the way that individuals see birth. And the more that we understand that this is something we can do at home or on our own or without, doctors and needles and protocols, the more that we do that, the better our birth outcomes are going to be. And so I guess I just would encourage anyone who is, processing trauma or, trying to address their, upcoming birth or pregnancies, to just realize that you have a lot of choices and that the medical profession is going to give you kind of a universe of options, but that there are other universes.
I like that.
I do too.
Can you share with our listeners where they can find you?
Sure. So I run a private doula practice called Mommy Tree. You can find me on Facebook at Mommy Tree Doula or Instagram at the same handle. You can also reach out to me by email at info at mommytreedoula.com. And, this is kind of the core of my work is doula work. But again, I am also an attorney who has experience working with women who have experienced birth trauma and all kinds of other kind of medical related trauma. And, I get it. And I am very passionate about helping people work through that, as well as helping people prevent that. So I kind of come at it from all angles in the work that I do with people. So definitely reach out if you have any questions, or just kind of want to talk something through with me, because, my passion is to help and to heal. So if I can do that, I will.
Oh, thank you. I love that. And thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. This was fantastic.
Thank you both so much for having me. It was a really amazing opportunity to talk with both of you.
If the Top Knot Squad's content makes you laugh, nod in agreement, or makes you feel less alone, we'd love your support in the cost of producing this podcast. Visit patreon.com/TopKnotSquad to learn more about our budget-friendly sponsorship tiers and how you can help ensure that TKS has a future. Every little bit helps.
If you like what you hear, then be sure to click the subscribe button in your podcast app. While you're there, leave us a review. You can find us on social media. Just search for Top Knot Squad. We welcome your feedback and love making new friends.